We will not fear anyone because our fight is a fight for love, is a fight for democracy, is a fight for humanity. And I am saying it clear and loud.
Yes.
To President Trump and his cabinet.
Yes.
I am not afraid of you. No fear! 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 That's right. No fear! And if there is no fear, what is it replaced with? Love. Love is our way.
Stand up. Yeah, another great way to start today's show. That was Mohsen Madawi, who had been an organizer for pro-Palestinian protests. The Trump administration snatched him off the streets after tricking him to come in to the office in Vermont where he lives. And he's a Columbia student. He's now free on bail after a judge ordered his release from federal immigration and custody. And we'll be talking more about it. Hello and happy Thursday to you. Thank you very much for joining me. I've got one of the best economists in the country, Dean Baker, joining me. That conversation starts up at about 24 minutes into today's show. But it is Thursday, so I will be hosting a hangout tonight at 8 p.m. I hope to see you there. I hope that you are hanging in. There's a lot to talk about, and this is where I do the headlines and the clips. Time for that right now. Let's get started with the news from the last 24 hours. Nobody does it better than me right here at Stand Up. So tell your friends, come on over and send me your news stories, your emails, and everything else. standupwithpete@gmail.com. Let's start at the awful Supreme Court where yesterday they heard an argument that appeared to open allowing Oklahoma to use government money to run the nation's first religious charter school. Oh, glee, oh, joy. A decision in favor of the school could lead to the opening of similar institutions across the country and lower the wall separating church and state. A perfect case to talk about with our good friend Eric Siegel. The main question apparently in the case is whether the First Amendment permits states to sponsor and finance religious charter schools. In other words, the Supreme Court is deciding whether charter schools, which are publicly funded and privately run, are fundamentally public or private. So I'll talk about that with Eric Siegel in the next couple of days. Let's take a look at what else happened yesterday. Of course, everybody's talking about Trump's 100 days. Comparing them to those of previous presidents. He's done the worst. Let's just say he's done by far the worst. And yesterday, data was released on the gross domestic product. I'll talk about that with Dean Baker coming up. But it suggested that the economy shrank in the first quarter by 0.3% following strong growth at the end of the year. So the decline apparently is somewhat misleading, and there's reasons for that. I talk more about that coming up with Dean Baker, but that was a pretty big story yesterday. In related news, to connect those last two stories, stocks performed worse in Trump's first 100 days compared with how they did at the start of every presidential term since 1974. I mentioned the story of Mohsen Madawi at the top. You heard from him. The Columbia student was arrested and his citizenship was released on bail. A Spanish official said that the cause of Monday's blackout was still unknown. In an early sign of the toll of Trump's tariffs, manufacturing in China apparently has slowed down. But Trump signed a pair of executive orders yesterday that walked back some tariffs for car makers, removing levies that Ford, General Motors, and others have complained would backfire on U.S. manufacturing by raising the cost of production and squeezing their profits. So you just got to kiss the ring if you want an exception. You got to go in and you got to get down on the knee. You got to beg him, and that's what he wants. That's what this is all about. I'm convinced of it. The latest on that, Wisconsin judge Hannah Duggan is her name, accused of obstructing federal authorities who are seeking to detain an undocumented immigrant for deportation, was temporarily relieved of her duties on Tuesday, on order from the state's high court. The Wisconsin Supreme Court order bars Milwaukee County Circuit Court Judge Hannah Duggan from her position while federal charges are adjudicated. But on a related note, she has a pretty good defense attorney. Former U.S. Solicitor General Paul Clement, who is an arch conservative, is going to be helping defend the Milwaukee judge who was arrested last week for allegedly helping this migrant evade arrest. How about this story? The little-known U.S. Postal Inspection Service, it's the law enforcement arm of the U.S. Postal Service, has quietly begun cooperating with federal immigration officials to locate people suspected of being in the country illegally, according to two people familiar with the matter and documents obtained by the Washington Post, dramatically broadening the scope of the Trump administration's government-wide mass deportation campaign. I mean, they're using every agency. They're having every agency do whatever they can to identify anybody that is here illegally and then do all they can with other agencies to remove them. It's just absolutely horrific. And yesterday, the Federal Election Commission, we found out, employees are soon going to be required to declare their work location in a daily questionnaire, part of the administration's effort to monitor compliance with the return to office mandates and identify unused space that may be ripe for disposal. So if you work in the federal government, you can no longer work remotely. It's such a stupid idea as well. It saves so much money, so much morale, and it's just awful that this administration has done that. I wonder how many people that work remotely are just absolutely in disarray right now. I wonder how many of them supported Trump and didn't see that coming, because what could affect your life? Not too many things that could affect your life that much more. Well, I guess this story would have had more Republicans yesterday voted to reject Trump's tariffs. Yesterday, the Senate took a vote. Only 3 Republicans joined Democrats in voting to end the national emergency that Trump has declared to impose his tariffs on most U.S. trading partners, leaving the measure short of support it needed to pass. The vote deadlocked at 49-49, meaning it failed despite 3 Republicans joining Democrats in favor of a measure that sought to terminate the national emergency declaration Trump is using. Senator Rand Paul, Susan Collins, and Lisa Murkowski were the 3 defections. They were not enough to make up the absences of 2 supporters, Sheldon Whitehouse, Mitch McConnell, who backed a similar measure last month. So they're going to have to take this vote again, right? Even if the resolution had passed the Senate, had no path to enactment, unfortunately, because the White House threatened a veto and House Republican leaders are going to do nothing about it. Still a very important vote. Then at least they got 3 Republicans on something. I don't know. I'm not going to hang my hat much on that because it's going nowhere, but did want to mention it. What else can I tell you in the headlines? Apparently, Trump is launching his own website, news website, like the Drudge Report. It's supposed to look just like the Drudge Report. Oh, and he's using taxpayer dollars. So he's closing and defunding every agency, news agency, Voice of America, PBS that gets any federal funding. But he's starting his own news agency with federal funding. It's called the White House Wire, and it's going to be a major propaganda effort for them. And like everything else he does, it's going to fail miserably. You can guarantee that. And finally, Kamala Harris has reemerged to condemn Trump as she's now weighing a run for California. And that is where we are going to start with the audio today. How about that? Time to get to the clip show. Those are the headlines. Now it's time for the audio clips that I've gathered for you today. Again, I can't do this without your support. Send me your ideas and most importantly, sign up for a paid subscription at patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Let's check in with the former vice president and candidate for president, Kamala Harris. Here's what she had to say.
Head of an administration working to advance America's highest ideals, we are witnessing the wholesale abandonment of those ideals. And what we are also seeing in these last 14 weeks is Americans using their voice and showing their courage. Americans who are speaking out to say, it is not okay to violate court orders. Not okay. Saying it is not okay to detain and disappear American citizens or anyone without due process. The courage of judges to uphold the rule of law in the face of those who would jail them. Of universities that are defying unconstitutional demands that threaten the pursuit of truth and academic independence. We are living in a moment when the checks and balances upon which we have historically relied have begun to buckle. And we here know that when the checks and balances ultimately collapse, if Congress fails to do its part, or if the courts fail to do their part, or if both do their part, but the president defies them anyway, well, friends, that is called a constitutional crisis. And that is a crisis that will eventually impact everyone. Instead of an administration working to advance America's highest ideals, we are witnessing the wholesale abandonment of those ideals. And what we are also seeing in these last 14 weeks is Americans using their voice and showing their courage. Americans who are speaking out to say, it is not okay to violate court orders. Not okay. Saying it is not okay to detain and disappear American citizens or anyone without due process. The courage of judges to uphold the rule of law in the face of those who would jail them. Of universities that are defying unconstitutional demands that threaten the pursuit of truth and academic independence.
All right, that's just some of Kamala Harris last night at a organization called Emerge in San Francisco. They're a training organization that seeks to prepare Democratic women to run for office. So there you have it, the former vice president not addressing rumors whether or not she might run for governor in California, but we will see soon. All right, how about this? This is Representative Dan Goldman. He is a Democrat, of course, and he was on Fox News with our old friend Will Cain, and it gets a little ugly here, but basically Dan Goldman telling Will Cain that Trump is not competent and probably should be removed by the 25th Amendment, and Will Cain gets very triggered, and it's worth it.
Even if you disagree, Congressman, and clearly you do with much of the president, the competency of the sitting president today, I think the accuracy and truth of those words do matter.
Well, I don't think he's competent, Will. I don't know what to tell you. Whether his cognitive abilities are sufficient to get past the 25th Amendment, we don't know that right now. But I think what is clear is that he has driven our country into a disastrous economy. He has undermining the fundamental rule of law and democracy. He is taking away benefits in order to cut taxes for the rich. I think even you, Will, would have to agree with me that this first 100 days is not at all what he promised the American people.
No, I'm sorry to notify you. I do not agree with you. I think this first 100 days is exactly what he promised the American people, and more importantly, exactly what was voted on by the American people.
Really?
But,
I think the American people thought that he was going to lower costs, not raise them.
All right, good stuff. I like that. I like it. And here is Sam Seder yesterday on the Majority Report reacting in real time to the release of the Palestinian student who the feds had basically kidnapped and had nothing to prosecute him for. So we'll see what happens. But I love Sam Seder. Here's his reaction yesterday.
A national security threat to me.
Yep.
We don't want one of those love bombs to drop on one of our allies. I'm glad at the very least he's been released. We'll go through due process, and it's also going to be interesting. These are the things that the administration is afraid of, because they're going to have to make their case in a court of law. This is not just about sending a letter that is going to be rather insufficient. They're going to have to prove how protests about U.S. foreign policy and somehow is a national security threat or inhibits U.S. foreign policy. Here's the bottom line: to deport him, to take away his visa. They're doing it under the auspices that his presence and activities have a serious adverse foreign policy consequence and could compromise a compelling foreign policy interest. If you just measure his actions, this anti-Semitism law they're putting in the Senate right now, they may vote on, you don't think they could find a punishment for American citizens who engage in the exact same activity? There's two parts of this. There is the, so-called punishment, but there's also the liability. And if the government can establish there is a liability associated with protesting U.S. foreign policy, that seems pretty problematic to me. So we will see. It would be great if a New York senator actually visited some of the high-profile people being held in prison for the exact same thing.
A member of the House could do it, too.
Yep, that's true. AOC could visit.
For example.
Or Pat Ryan.
Richard Torres.
Well, maybe he should stay away.
There you go. The Majority Report. Such a good show. Love watching those guys, listening to those guys. And now let's take a listen to the Vermont senator who it was in the state where Moad Masawi lives. He had something to say yesterday. Here's Bernie Sanders.
I am delighted that Mr. Mohsen Madawi has been released from immigration detention in Vermont. In the United States of America, a legal, permanent resident cannot and must not be incarcerated with absolutely no charges leveled against him. Expressing a political opinion about the war in Gaza is not a crime. In America, you should not be put in a jail cell for exercising your First Amendment rights. Sadly, all of this is part of the Trump administration's effort to move us in an authoritarian direction. This decision today is a step forward in protecting our Constitution, protecting due process, and protecting our fundamental rights.
All right, now let's go over to Fox News. They had Senator Ron Johnson, conspiracy theorist, Christian nationalist, white supremacist. He's starting to panic about Trump's tariffs, as are all other Republicans, because the president is tanking the economy on their watch.
I will say that I'm hearing an awful lot from manufacturers in Wisconsin. If this thing drags on, if the tariffs remain high, their businesses will be put out of business. One good piece of economic news with the recent numbers, business investment was up 9.8%. President Trump and his team has to be very concerned if this trade war continues, if the uncertainty and instability continues, that investment is going to fall off the cliff. And that'd be very bad for America. So again, this is a bold, but I think it's a reasonably high-risk strategy. I'm hoping that he succeeds. But the sooner he succeeds, the sooner we can bring certainty and stability to the American economy, the better.
All right. Wow. Yeah, well, that's not going to happen, Senator Johnson. Now let's head over to CNN, where Jake Tapper was interviewing a Republican named Brandon Gill, asking him why he's so determined to defund Sesame Street, PBS.
Would additionally like to cut funding for public broadcasting, PBS, which does receive some support from the federal government. It's interesting. I just have to say, on a personal level, I learned to read by watching Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and the Electric Company. That's literally how I learned to read as a kid. Why do you not think PBS is important?
Well, listen, I'm a member of the DOJ Subcommittee of Oversight. We were tasked with finding waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government and highlighting it. And one of those that we found, which Republicans and conservatives have talked about for decades, is state-sponsored media in the United States. China and North Korea have state-sponsored media. The United States does not need state-sponsored media. Listen, if Fox News or any other conservative news organization came to me and asked for taxpayer money, I would tell them no.
All right, well, you're an idiot. So, let me just play Trump for like 30 seconds. I'm sorry, but if you didn't hear this clip, basically he's saying that you're not going to be able to get your dollies. He's admitting it here. He's saying you won't be able to get as many cheap dollies, but maybe you can get a couple dollies that are more expensive. And I'm sorry that I'm playing this, but you got to hear this asshole.
I told you before, they're having tremendous difficulty because their factories are not doing business. They made $1 trillion with Biden, $1 trillion, even $1.1 trillion with Biden selling us stuff. Much of it we don't need. You know, somebody said, oh, the shelves are going to be open. Well, maybe the children will have $2 instead of $30, you know. And maybe the $2 will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally. But we're not talking about something that we have to go out of our way. They have ships that are loaded up with stuff, much of which, not all of it, but much of which we don't need.
And we've heard enough. All right. Well, that's all I've got for you, except for some comedy. This is about 3 minutes of the great Trey Crowder, comedian Trey Crowder, talking about Trump's first 100 days. And all of it is, as usual, exquisite. Take it away, sir.
Well, Trump's been in office for 100 days and Americans are not happy. I mean, sure, his most hardcore MAGA supporters, they're happy. I mean, the sheer number of libs owned alone, to say nothing of the crimes against humanity, yeah, they're thrilled. But some of the more reasonable right-wingers, you know, the ones who apparently voted for Trump so they could be sexist and say the word retarded at the office again or whatever, I think some of them are turning on him because his approval ratings are plummeting, so much so that Trump has said, obviously, those polls are fraudulent. He's going to look into it, and honestly, I can understand why he's confused. He's like, wait, why do people disapprove? Well, they say you're doing a bunch of bad and dumb stuff. Okay, but that's what I told them I was going to do. That's literally all I've ever done my entire life. And I got to say, I think that's a pretty good point. But either way, I'm just glad people are turning. One thing that I find both mildly encouraging and pants poop terrifying about this is that people seem to be turning on Trump for his actions, yet some of the worst consequences of those actions ain't even happened yet. Like, just wait till the shelves are empty and prices skyrocket and Pete Hegseth accidentally starts a war by drunk dialing a dictator. Like I know these first 100 days have felt like a series of drone strikes on our collective last nerve, but I fear the truth might be that things have not yet begun to suck. Right? And when the true suckiness does arrive, the only real upside is that maybe it will wake up enough people in this country to make a difference. I mean, if, you know, you could argue that as good as Trump is at things like rambling incoherently and sending out all caps toilet tweets, the thing he truly excels at is bringing people together. No, seriously. I mean, yes, he has grievously divided this country, but outside of our borders all around the globe, people from all walks of life and disparate philosophies are coming together, joining hands and declaring with one voice, this dude is the fucking worst, y'all. Trump sucks so much, he got China, Japan, and South Korea to team up. Dude, that's like bringing together the Bloods and Crips, Cats and Dogs, Ohio State and Michigan. They said it couldn't be done, but by God, they didn't account for Donald J. Trump. Trump sucks so much that elections in other countries will swing 30 whole points in the opposite direction to avoid being even adjacent to his brand of stank, right? Shout out Canada. Like, you can't overstate the degree to which he is unifying the democracies of the world in opposition to him. And yes, as an American, that makes me feel kind of like the surly little boy from the congrats, happy for you meme. You know, like, I'd prefer my own country not have this whole dipshit Eye of Sauron thing going on, but hey, glad we could help. And when's the last time the Western world came together to push back against a manic loudmouth ideologue and things got out of hand anyway, you know? Actually, don't answer that. But maybe this time he'll piss off enough people in this country for it to matter before it's too late, you know? And I'm sure the Democrats have a plan for that, you know? It's not like they've been comically disorganized or unimpressive lately or nothing. Either way, we're going to find out, right, together. And hey, we made it through this first 100 days. And if you're thinking about doing the math on how many days that means we have left, maybe just don't. Just don't do that. Maybe just go for a walk or something instead. Hang in there. Love y'all.
All right. There you go, Trey Crowder. And now it's time to get to my guest. I had Ron and Sana yesterday. I've got Dean Baker, Economist, today. I'll talk to Barry Ritholtz tomorrow. Obviously, there's a theme this week, trying to understand what the hell is happening in the economy, in our financial portfolios, and in our lives. And I'm very happy that Dean was able to join me. He's one of my favorite economists. He is my favorite economist. How about that? He is very widely respected, senior economist at the Economic Policy Institute, assistant professor at Bucknell. He's written so many articles, so many books. You can go find him at CEPR.net. You can also read his blog, Beat the Press. It's so good. Always providing commentary and economic reporting, criticism of economic reporting. And you should follow him on all the social medias. Everything is linked in the show notes. You can also support Dean and his work at Patreon, which I do. Happy to do it. And now, let's get to it right now with my first conversation in a long time with economist Dean Baker. Because if you want to know about economics, maybe ask someone who knows. Oh, yeah, there he is. The best economist in the whole wide world. Dean Baker, thank you for joining me. And now, new improved Dean Baker, because he's adapting to new media, you're launching a podcast. Congratulations. Where can people find it? What's it called?
Thanks, Pete. It's called Mostly Economics, and we'll have it up on our web, CEPR.net. First one is May 1st. Great day to start with Stephanie Kelton, who a lot of people have heard of as one of the leading promulgators of modern monetary theory. So we have a good discussion of that. It's a little dated. She asked me, we told her it's getting up, and she goes, remind people we taped it about a month ago. So we'll try to be more up to date in the future. But in any case, it should be a good segment.
I'm very excited to hear you in conversation with Stephanie Kelton. I have several sycophants of her and her theories that listen to this show. I am a huge Dean Baker fan. Whatever you say goes with me. I'm not arguing with Dean Baker, and I've got a bunch of things to go through. I'm a supporter of yours on Patreon, and I love and always have loved your piece. Your piece is commenting on the press, Beat the Press, CEPR.net. If you're not reading and following Dean Baker, then you don't know what's happening. And Dean, somebody yesterday said, economists right now are to epidemiologists in December 2019. You see what's coming, right? How much of a different way, how many different ways can it go at this point?
Well, most of the ways it could go are bad, and the question is bad to worse. So we're on a path with these tariffs where you remember the supply chain problems that are pandemic. We're about to see them again. And
you sure about that? You got to be sure.
Trump could change his policies. But the reason why I'm sure, this is one of these things that's about as predictable as you get. The boats aren't coming.
That's what I hear. Sorry to interrupt you.
If the boats aren't there, the supplies aren't there, So you had a lot of stockpiling. Some of that came out in the GDP data today, but that was continuing. So you had a lot of businesses. They saw this coming. They said, we better stockpile. So they're doing that. They've done that. So they have big stockpiles. But the boats already, the traffic is way down from year-ago levels. This week, it's going to be down even more next week. So we will start seeing shortages. Again, what shows up when, where, that you'd have to know more detail than I do. But we will certainly start to see shortages of a lot of things in 2 to 3 weeks. And then there's longer-term questions. Again, Trump, I'm not one of his confidants, so I don't know if he's going to back away from his tariffs. But you have to plan ahead, not me personally, but businesses have to plan ahead. So businesses looking for building up their stockpiles, Christmas toys, Christmas presents, all these things people buy in the fall, holiday season, they have to be placing those orders very soon. And you have to get the factories. A lot of them are in China. You're welcome not to like them, but that's the reality. A lot of them are in China. And if they're not producing them, we're not going to see this stuff come holiday season.
I already got my Halloween costume, same thing every year. And for Christmas, I'm just giving people plants. You can't stop me. You can't stop me, Dean.
Well, that's great. I love plants. I think that's a great gift. But, better or worse, people aren't coming to me for their Christmas giving advice. So, they want to get computers. They want to get toys. They want to whatever. That's what people want to do.
I heard all the toys come from China. 80% of toys come from China. I'm like, what? All right. Well, so GDP numbers came out today. You got a great post up already. 6 quick thoughts on the first GDP report. It could change in the next couple months. Those numbers can change. You taught me in that post. But the question I have for you is, what did the economy in our country look like at the end of last year? And how is it looking now?
It's really mind-boggling because, again, Trump is in a different world. One never knows what he thinks, who knows. But just the things he says, he goes, we inherited a disaster. You go, no, you inherited the best economy of really any president I could think of in my lifetime. We could maybe argue about the economy Clinton handed off to Bush in 2001. But you had low unemployment, 4% unemployment. Real wages were growing about 1.5% a year. We had inflation coming down. Maybe it was still higher than people wanted, but it was definitely going in the right direction. All the forecasts were that it would continue to come down. Economy's growing rapidly. We're creating jobs. People are working from home, which is a great thing. Again, he didn't get any credit for that. We had a factory construction boom. Trump says he wants to bring back manufacturing. Well, we're not going to bring back manufacturing like what we had 40 years ago, But we did see a huge increase, unprecedented increase in factory construction under Biden. I don't think anyone knew that. I know economic reporters that didn't know that. They think I'm making it up. I give them, here's the data. It's government data. You can look it up. I didn't make it up. It's right there.
No, I think that's the most.
Anyhow,
I do think you're gonna talk about this. I'm sure if we have time, but in terms of economic reporting, it does seem to be one of the most underreported stories because Trump and his dumb minions are talking about bringing manufacturing back to America. But one of the most underreported things is how much manufacturing, the investments that Democrats and Biden made under two pieces of legislation. And, my parents know about this plant they were building in Syracuse. People know they were building factories. My understanding is the manufacturing plants, some of them that were being built, maybe you can give us some numbers here, have been frozen because they had dealt with things like renewable batteries and renewable energy and things like that. And that's, not clean coal, clean, beautiful coal. So just underscore what was happening with manufacturing as a result of what happened under the Biden administration.
Yeah, so construction of factories literally doubled, and I'm adjusting for inflation. I'm not using phony numbers, so literally doubled, and it's really striking. If you look back, and I've gone back about 15 years. Maybe there's a different story if we check the 50s or something, 1950s. But if you look back, factory construction's more or less constant. There's ups and downs, but the amount we spend on factory construction has been more or less constant going back 15, 20 years. It begins to rise very rapidly in 2022. Not a secret. We passed the infrastructure bill. We passed the CHIPS Act to bring back semiconductor manufacturing. And we passed the Inflation Reduction Act to produce clean energy, electric vehicles, batteries, etc. And it had the effect. It's as clear as day. But now you have Trump come in and it's two things. One, he hates clean energy. He wants to promote global warming. I mean, it seems that way. I'll just say I don't know what goes through his head. But, so he's trying to cut off funding because a lot of there's subsidies, there's tax credits for people who buy electric vehicles, a lot of things in there to promote clean energy. He wants to nix all of that. He even wants to nix the semiconductor, the CHIPS Act, which is about bringing high quality, cutting edge semiconductor production back to the United States. So he wants, if Biden did it, he's against it. That's kind of the bottom line.
Right.
So you've had manufacturers cut back on these. I can't tell you where that stands. I mean, factory construction is down. That we've seen. How much of that is due to Trump quite deliberately trying to sabotage those bills? I don't have an answer to that at this point.
Well, I interrupted you on the framing of the end of last year, beginning of this year, where the economy was and what we learned with these GDP numbers today, because I think we're pretty screwed. I mean, he took an amazing you said one of the best economies a president has ever been given during the transition. And how would you describe where we're at now based on the data that's available?
Well, it's a mess. I mean, it was a very, very weird report. Now, just the bottom line number, top line number, GDP fell 0.3%. Now, I won't make a big deal about that because, two things. One, whether it falls 0.3%, goes up 0.3%, we could make too much out of it's a negative number. It is a negative number, but we can make too much out of it. The others, these will be revised. So they revised the GDP report. This is called an advance report. Next month, they'll do a preliminary report. Then they do a final report in June for the first quarter. Those are often fairly different. So given that we had very strange numbers, we had a record trade deficit, which is kind of incredible. I mean, that's because everyone's trying to import stuff ahead of the tariff. Now, in fairness, relative to the size of the economy, it's not a record. But if we just say in dollar terms, it was a record trade deficit. That was very strange. Huge surge in imports showed up in inventories. A lot of the stockpiling I was talking about, you could see that very clearly. So firms increased their purchases of computers by 112% or 112% annual rate. So we saw that. So it's a very, very weird report that way. But other things that are distressing that we saw weakening of consumption, so cross categories. One that I like to look at is restaurants. I like to look at that because that's very much discretionary. So, what we're spending on housing doesn't change that much quarter to quarter. Healthcare, that's not so much how do I feel. I mean, obviously some people can't afford their healthcare. I get that, but that's not most people, thankfully. But you want, how's my budget? How are things going? Well, going to a restaurant, particularly I look at fast food restaurants also because that's not being driven by what Elon Musk is doing. So that fell at about a 3.6% annual rate in the first quarter. It's not catastrophic, but it's unusual. I'll just put it that way. Also, another thing that was striking, fitting with what Trump's been doing, there was a fall in foreign tourism, that 5.5% annual rate. It shouldn't be a surprise that people on their vacation, whether it's from Europe, Japan, wherever it might be, they're probably not that anxious to come here and risk being harassed by,
the fall in tourism.
People.
How much? That's going to get really bad in terms of foreigners wanting to visit America. Not only are they pissed at us, if they're not pissed at us, they're worried about getting stuck. And if they're not worried about getting stuck here, they're worried about the high prices of things. I'm sure plenty of people will still come to America, go to our parks and Disney and so on, and in New York City and a lot. But man, I mean, it's going to be hundreds of billions of dollars of losses for the tourism industry and for the country, right? Like that, I feel like that's going to be huge, impossible to predict, I guess.
Well, it's going to be large. I mean, if you go to 224. The amount we got from foreigners coming here, and that also includes students, which is another big thing. What students going to come here knowing anytime Marco Rubio hears something bad about you, out, middle semester, out.
He's it's crazy,
Yeah, but just by comparison, we get $215 billion last year from foreigners, combination students, tourism, some business travel. Our agricultural exports are $160 billion. So we're talking about 30% more. And there just seems maybe Trump considers it a good thing. He doesn't want us to talk to people from Europe and Japan and,
don't even try, Dean. Don't try to speculate. He hates everybody who doesn't love him is the only thing you need to know. I think there's so many good pieces that you've been putting up over at CEPR.net. People get them if they subscribe to you on Patreon, which I do. And I got to ask you about two things that I feel like are getting – well, one thing I heard you make a comment in an interview you did about how one of the issues with tariffs now and forever is the culture of corruption that they can create. Explain how terrorists create corruption and how the most corrupt leader of our generation might be – doing that.
Yeah.
Countries and companies have to kiss the ring to get an exception.
Exactly. So the tariffs, and particularly the way we administer them, is we give enormous ability to the president to raise them, lower them, grant exemptions for particular types of items. He just did for smartphones, maybe Tim Cook or Tim Apple, as he calls him, handed him something. We don't know the motivation. I mean, in fairness to him, it might have been he was worried a lot of people were going to see $2,000 smartphones and get really pissed, which they would, so I can't speak to the motivation specifically, but there's no doubt about it. It gives incredible opportunities for corruption because you could have companies and countries, go, oh, this is really going to hurt us. Why don't we go down to Mar-a-Lago and, we'll cozy up to Trump, see what he wants. Does he want 5 million? Does he want 10 million? And all of the people who could enforce that are off the job. So you did have people that, were ostensibly independent, within the executive branch who could police that. As it is, they're all gone. They've fired them. And then on top of that, you had the Supreme Court ruling, which, I suspect even Roberts, who, of course, wrote the lead opinion as the Chief Justice, he said, this was in discussion. I don't know if it was in the ruling itself. He said, I couldn't imagine a president taking bribes, because needless to say, the dissenters said, well, this opens the door. The presidential immunity clause opens the door. And he basically said, no president would do that. Well, we got a guy sitting there in the White House who sure looks like he's doing that.
Yeah, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court has a real issue with his imagination. He also can't respond that people would, be racist and have racist voting laws in our country, or, that campaign finance is a real issue. You have a great piece up about how Doge is costing more money than saving us. It's titled, How Much Has Elon Musk and the Doge Boys Cost Us? Elon Musk's Doge initiative promised $2 trillion in government savings, but he's delivered minimal document savings, you write. Many of them exaggerated or false, while likely causing greater long-term costs through service disruptions, lawsuits, and regulatory rollbacks that benefit the wealthy. This idea of cutting government and saving money is not working. It's going to cost us more money, and you don't need – this is the thing. I don't know if we need Dean Baker. You don't need an economist to tell us this, but tell us this.
Yeah, well, so much of what he did was totally harebrained, and it is. I guess it speaks to the Silicon Valley culture that they're the only ones who know anything, and he goes running around with his chainsaw, and I'm gonna, everyone wants to get rid of government waste. That's not a controversial position, but the question is, how do you find it? What is it? And again, there are people who've been studying it for years and years, and they fired them first thing. So they have all these inspector generals, in particular, the Inspector General for the Small Business Administration. They found hundreds of billions of dollars of fraudulent claims in the pandemic programs. Great thing. So why don't we do something about it? Well, what they do? They fired the Inspector General. So yes, there is corruption, there is waste, but you have to know what you're doing. You have to look for that. Instead, you just have Musk goes, I'm going to cut 20% of the staff at this agency or that agency. He hasn't looked at the agency. He doesn't know what they do. He went to the FAA. He said that the Aeronautics Administration, he wanted everyone to take buyouts. And they said, wait a second, we're short of air traffic controllers. He goes, I didn't know that. Maybe before you tried to get people to take buyouts, he went to the National Atomic Security Agency. I think I mangled that slightly, but they're the agency that oversees the safety of our nuclear weapons. And he laid off a large chunk of the staff. And then they told him, no, we need these people. He goes, we better rehire them. But he didn't even have emails for them because he deleted their government emails. So those are just some of the obvious ones. But then you have things like he got rid of direct file, which is this new program initiated under Biden that makes it much easier for people to file their income tax. Most people have very simple returns. They could do it for free. It takes away a lot of anxiety. It's low cost. It's quick. He gets rid of that. Why would you get rid of that? And then the best one, or I shouldn't say the best one, the most egregious, and we see where this stands because it's in court now, the Consumer Financial Products Protection Bureau. Again, it's about getting rid of financial fraud. He gets rid of that. He said, delete. He put that on Twitter or X, delete. Like, that's very clever. This is an agency that gets rid of fraud that my friends are making a lot of money off of. Well, and then, I left out the IRS, which again is really front and center.
Yeah.
The IRS,
Oh God. Yeah.
He laid off much of the staff of the IRS, which was already understaffed. Biden tried to beef it up. And again, this is game playing by the Republicans. They had all this story about jackbooted IRS. I pay my taxes because I get a paycheck and it comes out of the paycheck. So there's not much they could do with me. They already have my taxes, so there's not much issue there. What the extra agents that he hired are to go after these Wall Street guys and Elon Musk's friends, and make sure they pay their taxes. And if you lay off all the people that do that, well, basically you make taxes voluntary and a lot of people won't pay them then.
What do you have to say? You have a piece also about the cuts in NIH funding and what that's going to mean for drug costs. I suppose that's one of the most important consequences of this is titled How Much of Elon? No, that's not it. Let me find it here. But my question to you is, here it is. Trump's attack on NIH will mean fewer drugs and likely more expensive ones. So you can talk a little bit about that, and people should go read it because there's a lot that you need to read the nuance here when we're talking about economics and to Dean Baker. But my understanding, Dean, is the history of America is one of the reasons why we're such a wealthy country is because the federal government invested so much in science and research, developing drugs and treatment that the entire rest of the world buys. A lot of people got rich, but a lot of people got healthier. And this is as a direct result of NIH's funding. And to get an NIH grant, to get federal funding, ain't easy. It's easy to demagogue some research project or another and say, why are we studying this or that? But the truth is, anybody who's ever applied for a grant realizes how hard it is to get. My question to you is, what about the cuts in NIH funding? What do they mean for the economy? And, of course, what do they mean, as you wrote about, for drug prices?
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, just an incredible story because our drug research, our biomedical research, I should say, because a lot of it isn't drug specific. It's cutting edge. It's we're the world leaders, by far. And China has advances, and maybe they're getting close, but we're the world leaders in that. And this is the way in which we develop new drugs, and a lot of these things have been really great. And I'm not a big fan of drugs. I'm not up there with RFK Jr., but I'm not encouraging everyone to go out and you feel bad, take a drug for this, take a drug for that. But the reality is we've had a lot of great cures. The COVID vaccines were great. If we didn't have COVID vaccines, I'm sorry, the anti-vax people, they're nuts. That they prevented millions of people from getting sick and dying from COVID. And it's a long, long list, though. I mean, we eliminated measles. I mean, go down the list. So we've had great successes with research that originally is funded from NIH. And again, that's not going to affect anything tomorrow for the obvious reason. You don't get research results tomorrow. It's not that someone at NIH is going to find X, Y, and Z, and then the next day there'd be a drug on the market that will cure cancer. It's a long process, but it will have a big impact. And why you would want to give that up, both for our health, but also again, economics. I'm not a fan of the drug industry. I think we should do that. I'll come to that in a second. We should do this very differently. But the fact that you have great innovations that come from that research, to my mind, that's absolutely indisputable. And why you would just, take your chainsaw and just say, "Wow, we're going to whack it," that's close to crazy. Now, in terms of drug pricing, go, okay, well, one of the things, and I've been at the forefront complaining about it, that one of the things that we could do, it's under the law that if the federal government pays for the research that subsequently is used to make a drug, it has the authority to restrict the prices, have compulsory licensing. So instead of someone having a monopoly on a patent, they would have to license it out to 2, 3, 4 companies, so it'd be competition, bring down the price. Because again, one of the realities that, it's almost hard to wrap your head around, drugs are almost invariably cheap to manufacture and distribute. They're expensive because we give patent monopolies. So you have cancer drugs, and some of the new ones cost over $100,000 a year. If you just said, free market, anyone could sell it, might be hundreds, maybe 1,000, 2,000. You want to have people doing GoFundMes for the cancer.
Your obvious solution to that is never going to happen because of the way that things work in this country, campaign finance and so on. I guess my question to that would be: do other countries that develop drugs, do they ever do that?
They do control their prices way more than we do. So they do limit pricing. So what you find, if you look at Canada, you look Germany, France, pick your country, they'll typically pay half, a third, sometimes even less for the same drugs we have here. Again, I'd like to go a different route. I'd just say, pay for the research up front. Because the reality is drug companies do spend a lot on research. We do the basic stuff. Then you get a Pfizer or Merck or someone, they actually bring it through to a marketable drug. I'd say let's pick up the tab for that. I mean, there are different ways you could talk about doing that. But we kind of did that with Moderna. We paid for the research. Then we gave Moderna a monopoly on it. But we paid for the research, the testing. And, if at the end of the day, thankfully it came up with a good vaccine. But if at the end of the day they come up with nothing, we'd be disappointed, obviously. They would be disappointed. But they got paid, So I would do that do that more broadly. And then you'd have cheap drugs. But, no one else is going that route. We're really the world leaders, and they kind of follow our pattern.
Dean, I'll let you go. I got one more question in the comments. Most of the comments are commenting on your T-shirt. All dogs are individuals. The best comment is, I love Mr. Baker's shirt. It makes the stark news slightly easier to take. I love that, too. End on China. It's the name of my new band. End on China. What do we need to know about their ability to weather the trade war versus our ability? That's my question, but you can answer any question you want vis-a-vis China and the trade war.
Trump, Trump's the worst on this, but a lot of people are confused about the relative powers of the U.S. and China here. China could easily weather this. They lose a big market, but try and think about for a second what the issue is. You have, you're sitting there with your stockpiles of food and, everything else. And I'm hungry and I'm going, well, I'm not going to buy your stuff. Who's that going to hurt more? You're looking to make money selling it to me, but at the end of the day, you could sell it to someone else. You could give it to your family. And that's kind of the position China is in. So it definitely hurts them. There's no two ways about that. But it's so asymmetric. And we're about to see that because I think we were talking about this a moment ago. The ships aren't coming.
Yeah.
So we're about to see huge shortages of toys, of clothes, of parts for factories. We're about to see that. Now, there's a lot of stockpiling, and so it's not going to hit tomorrow. But if we continue in this pattern where the ships aren't coming, we will be feeling that, probably see some of it before the end of May, and certainly by the summer, we will be seeing a lot of it.
things are going to change, I think, pretty drastically, it would seem, based on your analysis, for most Americans, certainly for people middle and lower income.
Yeah, I mean, it's good, just infuriating, that so many of these people voted for Trump, and it's just, I'm not blaming them; they were lied to, but it's just unfortunate that they thought this guy was going to help them, and he's kicking them in the face.
Dean, love talking to you. Excited about the new podcast. Where can people find it? Everywhere the podcasts are?
Yeah, so it's mostly economics, and we will certainly have it on our website, CEPR.net. It'll be on YouTube. I imagine a lot of other places as well.
Awesome, buddy. Thank you very much for joining me. I'd love to get you. I want you to hold our hand as much as possible through the next few months and years. As always, I depend a lot on your analysis. I read everything you write, and I always appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. Thanks, Dean.
Thanks a lot, Pete. Good talking to you again.
Yeah, Dean Baker, everybody. Go check him out at CEPR.net. Support him on Patreon and support him everywhere else. All the links in the show notes to Dean's work. I hope to see you at our hangout tonight at 8 East. Be there. You'll get an email if you're a paid subscriber. If you're not, sign up now. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic. That's it. It's a wrap for me on today's episode of Stand Up. Can't do it without you. I am so grateful to you, especially you bumblebees. Listened all the way to the end. Tell me what you thought of Dean Baker. Hopefully economics is not too boring for you. I am fascinated in it and everything he had to say, so hopefully you appreciated it. John Carroll writes and performs all the music on this show. Go order his new album. Support him on tour, johncarroll.org, and be the change you want to see. Today, listen to the right voice and try to get rid of all that chatter in your mind today. I love you. I'll talk to you tomorrow or tonight. Bye-bye.